You pray for me every day because I spent 3 full days with 6 ladies in my life. And when she said you could have 7, no, I don't know any man would want 7 times. Thank you for bailing me out. I had a good. It was fun. I enjoyed it. We had a great time, and it was a blessing to spend time with our grandkids. We always love it. And especially with one getting ready to go back to college here in just a couple of weeks and be gone, and it's always fun to have them around. Amen? Amen. Turn me over to 1 Kings. 1 Kings chapter 19. We're going to get there in just a moment. 1 Kings chapter 19. Continuing the series on Don't Blink, like I said, every time I turn around, I find some other part of it that I really can relate it to that one phrase. And I think the reason why I like that phrase is because it continues to, to me anyway, it continues to speak to me about how I view things, or about what I'm missing maybe when I'm looking at things. Obviously, your actual ability to blink your eyes is important to your eyes and important to your vision. But sometimes when we blink, we miss things that we could have seen. It's interesting when we travel, obviously, because I do the most of the driving, so I'm looking at scenery. We were all over the state this 3 days. We went to Springfield for a day for swimming for the kids, and the next morning we got up bright and early, 4 o'clock in the morning for Deb and I actually, and then we headed up to Galena for the day, and this, that, and the other. And we went over to by the end of that day we were in Rockford. It's like, and it was and the next day we were in Aurora. But I traveled a different route. I got off the interstates. I just traveled Route 20, and it's so pretty up in that area. But it's just pretty to get out and see America. At one point I told, Kylie was sitting in the front seat of me, or maybe it was Debbie, and I said, this is what the movie Cars was about, is getting back on the roads that created America, and these little towns have been sort of swept away. But some of those little towns, if you blink, you'll miss something. But with traveling with Debbie, she's always blinking. She's never looking to see. I say, hey, look at that. She goes, what? 10 minutes later. What? But sometimes we miss things. But I want to talk to you today about something I think is important. We're going to get to it in a minute in this chapter, but we live in a very loud world. Would you believe that? You agree with that? We live in a world that everyone seems like they're trying to shout louder than the other one. I mean, things change even in our own society, and what somebody has already changed, people are still shouting real loud because they want it changed. It's already been changed. It's already done, but they're shouting real loud. It's not unusual to find ourselves feeling like we're being bombarded by all kinds of loudness in our society. I know Rick used to be a headbanger until he married Cindy, and then he started listening to Michael Bublé. I'll never forget the trip to Canton. I mean, I've known Rick for 100 years, and he's always been like, bah, 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 bah. And it's like we're driving back from Canton, and we're in his truck or whatever he had at the time, van or whatever, and he plugs in this CD, and it's like, what is this? He says, it's Michael Bublé, and he's really good. Don't you really like him? He just sort of calms me. I'm going, who are you? What the love of a woman won't do in a man, right? But I mean, we get bombarded all over the place with loudness and things going on. In counseling a lot of times, I have couples in marriage counseling, they're sitting as close as Gail and Rob sometimes, that close, but they're yelling at each other, trying to get louder than the other one next to them. It's not unusual for us to be at a restaurant. If you go out to lunch today, sit in the restaurant for a moment and listen to the noise level as it rises and gets loud. Kids. One kid goes in real quiet. I imagine Lily is probably the quietest one back there. She's probably the quietest one back. But I guarantee you, once the kids start going, her level comes up too. Why? Because she wants to be heard. She wants to be heard. Even the quietest want to be heard at times. The lighting in a room sometimes will seem loud. I said one time, my counseling office, I keep corner lights in there and turn off the fluorescent lights because I don't really like fluorescent lights. And I was hadn't turned them off one time, and And I had a couple in there, and I said, oh man, it's really loud in here. The guy goes, what? And I said, turn off lights. Now it's quiet, because now I can think about things. Okay, you guys can have this. I don't want to blow in my notes. So, but in chapter 19 of 1 Kings, probably one of my favorite passages in all of the Bible, because it says so much as you get down into it. But I'm going to back up, if I can, to chapter 18 just to hit a couple of parts, because I think you have to have a running start at chapter 19. You all know this story, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time in 18. It says, if you look at 21, it says, then Elijah stood in front of them and said, how much longer will you waver? Hobbling. I'm reading now the New Living Translation. Between two opinions. Sometimes we get caught in a trap. We get caught to where we're thinking two thoughts. The word is very clear. A double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. So we have to get ourselves set in a place of to where we know. I know this. I know what I believe. You know, I know this. I believe this, and I have to center myself on that. And not Pastor Rick, where he's like a headbanger one moment and Michael Bublé the next. You got to pick a team, okay? And it's like he's saying, look, how long will you be hobbled between two opinions? If you drop on down to then verse 25, and he says this. He starts then picking at these prophets. See, the prophets that were there were prophets of Baal. And they were confusing the people of Israel. You know, people of Israel got confused a lot, didn't they? I mean, God did great, mighty things. All the time doing mighty things. And they get confused. They get messed up. And he said, so he decides to make a show. He's going to display some stuff here. And so in verse 25 he says, then Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, you go first. Because he's made a bet with them, sort of, in a way. He says, you're God, you think he's so great? Let's see how great he is. And then I'm going to show you something. And so he says, you go first. I want you to go first. And so they did what they did. And what I like about Elijah at this point, he's got a lot of confidence, doesn't he, in what God's going to do. If you go through the next couple of passages here, I'm not going to read through that part of Scripture. He's got a lot of confidence. He's telling them, hey, is your God asleep? Did he go to McDonald's for lunch? You know, things like that. He was just picking at him. Why he just picking at him? And they couldn't get what needed to be done. Now, so then you drop on down to verse 30, and then Elijah, and he's setting himself up to prove to the people God is God, and there should be no other gods before him. And so he calls to the people. He says in verse 30, then Elijah called to the people, come over here. He's gather in close. Get real close, guys. I want to show you something. Get in here so I could show you and demonstrate to you what our God, your God, can do. He goes on to say, and they all crowded around him and repaired the altar of the Lord the Lord had torn down. And now he starts dumping water on it. Buckets and buckets of water. Just dousing it. You ever been camping? And if you haven't, you ever been around a campfire where it's rained the day before and the wood's all wet? Man, you can drench that in gasoline and it's not necessarily going to burn it, you know. But the thing is that he wanted it so wet that God could prove his point. So he's setting himself up then. So he's got all this mighty works going on. He then kills the prophets of Baal. Now that's an amazing battle. I think only equivalent to what Samson did to the Philistines. But he kills the prophets of Baal, and then he goes on and tells in verse 41, he goes on and tells Ahab, hey, you need to get something to eat and drink, for I hear a mighty rainstorm coming. Now, it had been a drought, but he says, I hear a mighty rainstorm coming. And he then bows himself to the ground, his face to the ground, between his knees, and he begins to pray in the next verse. And all of a sudden, the rain hits. And still, he's full of the power that had been invested in him. He's feeling it still. To the point that at the very end of that chapter, he says, verse 45, and soon the sky was filled with black clouds. Heavy wind brought a terrific rainstorm, and Ahab left quickly for Jezreel. Then the Lord gave special strength to Elijah. I like that. Gave special strength to Elijah. He tucked He tucked his cloak into his belt and ran ahead of Ahab's chariots all the way to the entrance of Jezreel. Now, Ahab is so impressed, he's going home and telling his wife, man, you should see what Elijah just did. Now, Jezebel wasn't having none of that. So she says, I'm going to kill him. And she says, sends out a warning to him. He says, I'm going to kill you. Before the end of this day, I'm going to kill you. And so what does he do? He's this mighty man of God. He's just all about the things God. Now, he's been hearing God all up to this point. Now, am I right? He's been doing what God's been telling him to do all the way up to this point. And then all of a sudden, she says, I'm going to kill you. Maybe that's probably where the phrase comes from. There's nothing, what is it? Something about a woman scorned? I don't know. But anyway, it just popped in my head. Probably should have left it there. The thing is that, but Elijah then is afraid, fled in verse 3 of chapter 19. He's afraid. He flees to Beersheba, a town in Judah, and he left his servant there. Then he went alone into the wilderness, traveling all day. He sat down under a solitary broom tree and prayed that he might die. Now, this is the guy that just killed everybody. He just called in the rainstorm. He just ran faster than a chariot of horses, horse-drawn chariot. But now he's saying, I wish I was just dead. I've had enough, Lord. Did you hear that phrase? I've had enough, Lord. I can't take no more. I can't handle it no more. I've had enough. This is too tough. He goes on to say, take my life, for I am no better than my ancestors who have already died. And he laid down and fell asleep under the broom tree. In that passage, he stops. Who's he listening to there now? He's not listening to God anymore, is he? He's listening to himself. He's listening to the weakness that's developed in him. He's listening. He has fallen back into a habit that he had probably broke a long time ago that didn't make him the mighty man of God. Now drop on down. Drop on down to verse 8. And it says here, so he got up and ate and drank, and the food gave him enough strength to travel 40 days and 40 nights to Mount Sinai, the mountain of God, where he came into a cave and spent the night. Now, in the latter part of verse 9 it says this, but the Lord said to him, what are you doing here, Elijah? What are you doing here? Why are you here? What is wrong with you? Haven't I showed you and displayed in you enough to show you what I can do, what I'm willing to do, if you'll just be obedient, if you'll just focus on me and not yourself? But see, he had just gone through all those victories. He had just had all that stuff, but he started focusing on his own weaknesses. He allowed what to come in, because every act up until that point were faith acts, were they not? Every point in chapter 18, he's walking by faith. He's saying things of faith. And all of a sudden, what happens in? Fear creeps in. It didn't just creep in. It came in and slammed the door on him, didn't it? And it's got him trapped now in fear. So in verse 10, Elijah replied, I have been zealously serving the Lord God Almighty, but the people of Israel have broken their covenant. Now, you see what he did there? He's shifting the blame of where he's at to somebody else. If they would have just come and done that, if they'd have just done what they were supposed to do, I wouldn't feel like this right now, God. If they'd have just done what they were supposed to, he says, I have zealously served the Lord God Almighty, but the people of Israel have broken their covenant with you, torn down your altars, killed every one of your prophets, and I am the only one left. Now they are trying to kill me too. Verse 11, go out and stand before me in the mountain, the Lord told him. Now, Elijah gives all these excuses. He's called down fire. He's done all these things. But right now, he's getting ready. God's getting ready to do something that he's never done before in Elijah's life. He's getting ready to do something miraculous. Because in that moment of fear, Elijah blinked. He blinked at what was going on. The Lord now is trying to help Elijah get his bearings back. The Lord's going to get him in a way and put him in a position he's never been before. So let me finish reading that and I'll go on to some of my notes here. It says, and go out and stand before me, before the mountain. The Lord told him, as Elijah stood there, the Lord passed by and a mighty windstorm hit the mountain, and it's such a terrible blast that the rocks were torn loose. But the Lord was not in the wind. I know you've read this. I know we've talked about this before. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake, there was a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. After the fire, there was a sound of a gentle whisper. That's why I liked this version, because it's gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And the voice said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" God just moved in a very miraculous way in Elijah's life. Many people, many Christians often think that we hear God our best in our loud busyness of life, and our loud busyness of our ministry. We all have ministries here of some sort or fashion. Ashley's getting ready to venture into her new ministry, and even the shyness that she has of people, she's going to go into her comfort zone. She's going to go into her calling, that she was called as a child. She didn't know it as a child. She didn't know it for years, and she would question it, as Debbie said. But she's getting ready to step into her comfort area, her calling, and her ministry is going to blossom out of that. And when that happens, you know it. Every one of us know it when we step into our ministry. But in reality, it's the quiet time of our lives. It's the quiet, peaceful time of our lives that God bends our ear the most. A gentle whisper. That's an interesting phrase right there. It's a gentle whisper. The Lord spoke to Elijah in a whisper, not in the wind, not in the earthquake, not in the fire, but in a whisper. Do you remember the last time God whispered to you? Can you remember the whispers? The many whispers? As I was putting this together earlier this week, I got to thinking about a night at First Assembly God in Pekin. And I was a young believer. Really wet behind the ears. Just really didn't know a lot. I was watching Pastor Callahan preach. And inside me, I thought I would like to do that someday. I'd like someday to preach the Word of God. Was it a whisper? I don't know. All I know is it resonated in me. And a whisper of God will resonate in you for years and years and years to come. It's that special place. You know, it's like when you're married, there's the whispers between the husband and wife that you remember. You remember those intimate times, those times that you couldn't get any closer. Well, that's what a whisper of God is, because you're hearing something, and He's drawing you. I think Debbie said it, or the women's thing a while back. He's leaning into you, and you're leaning into Him, so you can hear Him better. And He's saying it in such a way that not everybody else hears it. Now, we have those times in our lives, in our walk with God, that it's right out there. It's right out in the middle, in front of everybody. And you'll remember that, and you'll be awestruck by that. But it's that gentle whisper that changes your life. It's that gentle whisper that keeps coming back. How do I know that? Because that moment at First Assembly, that night, He placed safely in my heart and my mind ministry, preaching, teaching. He placed there. And during the times of the roughest times of my walk, the roughest times, and Pastor Rick and I, we go back quite a ways in the ministry. He knows the rough times where I questioned. Did I miss God? There was a time, beloved, after our first church, that I went through what's called Cursillo week. It's a Cursillo weekend. And it's a weekend that the Catholic Church puts on, and I had a person pay my way and invite me to do it, and I went. It was a powerful time of my life, because I went in and I had been broken. And I was questioning. I must have missed God, Deb, because we moved to this little bitty town. I threw away I was prospering in a business at the time. I was working for the federal government at the time. Had a retirement, I'd been able to retire from the federal government. And I walked away from that to take this little $100 a week job at a church. $100 a week. Well, so they made me principal of the school, and I worked in the school all the time too. But that was another $100 a week, so I went to $200 a week. And the thing is that school is only part of the year. I didn't think about that when I heard the whisper of God. But when that left and I walked away from that and I felt broken by it, I started searching. I said, well, maybe I'm not hearing him correctly. Maybe I messed up along the way. And it was during those times. I remember in the little chapel of that weekend, and I'm sitting there, and the Catholics have what they call the Stations of the Cross. And one of the stations, I can't tell you what it is because I'm not Catholic, but there's a station that says, and Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Now, I can't tell you what station that is, but I can tell you this, what God spoke to me that night, another gentle whisper. He says, Bob, are you willing to forgive those that you feel damaged you at that church and treated you so viciously at that church? Are you willing to forgive them as my son forgave you? That was a gentle whisper that still resonates in me. It set in motion my understanding, my hunger to seek after how to live a life of forgiveness and to teach forgiveness to others. But back in there was that gentle whisper of First Assembly. And God's saying, He's still beckoning. He's still beckoning. And so many times that whisper is what gets us through. So it gets us through. And in my troubled times of ministry, that whisper of God in First Assembly resonates when I need to. He would bring that to remembrance that night so many times. He'd bring it to my memory. What does the whisper that He spoke to you do in your troubled times? I know you hear Him. I know you hear Him. But He doesn't speak audibly. I think Kim said it best in Foundations earlier about, I don't remember who they were talking about because my mind was one way, but she said it. She goes, she don't believe it was it Jesus? Yeah, you said Jesus. Jesus didn't hear an audible voice from God in the garden. But somewhere in here, that whisper rose up. And not only did it change Jesus, it gave us an opportunity to live life beyond where we were headed before Jesus did what He did. But it was that gentle whisper of God saying, Jesus, if you just do what I ask you to do, if you just make my will your will, watch what I'll do through you and for others. Just watch. When your strength is gone, do you remember that whisper? When you feel like the whole world and you're the only one, you're Elijah, you're the only one out here. Everybody else is failing out there, God. And if they would do their job, if Bree and Aaron would do their job with the children, my kids would be great. If Hank would just do his job as a mechanic, my car would never break down. I mean, whispering in you instead of putting it on somebody else. When faith seems weak, when your faith seems weak, you ever been there? I'm not saying you need to confess it. I'm asking you to remember. But then I'm asking you to remember the whisper of God that gets you back to where you're supposed to be. When you're discouraged, when you feel depressed. Elijah was depressed. I'm going to get that in a minute, so I shouldn't get ahead of myself. When you feel like Elijah felt, I'm the only one. What's that whisper saying to you? In ministry, we've had our ups and downs in ministry. If you listen. If you listen to the whisper. Because it's there. It's always there. I remember things in 35 years of ministry. I remember sometimes minute details of things. And other times I can't remember. Now, I can't remember a person's name. Okay? Obviously. I call everybody in here a different name all the time. My grandkids, they don't think I know any of their names. Just start at the top and end at the bottom. Somewhere in the middle, I'm going to be right. Thing is that I can remember the whispers of God, though. Why? Because they're placed in a special place in my heart and in my mind. So when you're struggling with things, when you're hurting, when you're feeling discouraged, when everything else seems around you to be loud and noisy and busy, listen to the whisper. Elijah heard the whisper. But in order to hear the whisper, one's got to be still. We've got to be still. We've got to get to a place that we're still. And I looked up the definition of still, and it says quiet and calm. We don't live in a calm world. We're busy all the time. I feel like I've drove 1,000 miles this week. I haven't, but that's how busy the 3 days were. But in that 3-day period of busyness, I had to hear and listen to the things of God. Not to pick on Ashley, but she's getting ready to jump into a new thing, so we'll just pick on her today. But the thing is that when she gets into that job, She's got to hear the whisper of God long before she hears anything else, because that's what's going to carry her through the frustration times. I remember, I probably shouldn't tell Ashley this one, but I remember when Debbie got a job in ICU. I don't know, it was your first week, first day, it was early. And in ICU, you only have 2 patients. That's all you get. You get 2, and that's all you get. Well, they both died in one day. Not her fault. They just died. And she came out of there, and she was broken. She was done. I'm done. I can't do this. I'm not going to do this anymore. I can't do this anymore. But she had to hear. Then the Lord will speak through Dan when you have a day like that. Believe it or not, Ashley, He'll speak through Dan. It's every day. Okay. It's like, and He'll speak that whisper. And then inside of you, it's going to be like, oh yeah, okay, I'm not looking at this right. Okay, I have to get my bearings straight. I have to focus on. I know God's told me to do something. I know He's called me to do it. There's another thing is that when you're still, it says you're devoid of emotion. Well, maybe motion too, but emotion. You're not emotional about it. God wasn't emotional when He spoke to Elijah, because He wasn't in the wind. That's emotions. He wasn't in the earthquake. That's emotions. He wasn't in the fire. Those are all equated. We can equate all those to an emotional thing that goes on in our lives. But He was in the what? The quiet voice, the quiet whisper. That's a place where it's peaceful. That's a place where nothing else really is going to bother you anymore. Turn me over to Exodus chapter 14. Exodus 14. And in Exodus 14, verse 13, it says this. But Moses told the people, "Don't be afraid. Just stand still and watch the Lord rescue you today." Now they're at the Red Sea. Setting of this is they have fled Egypt. The chariots of Egypt are chasing them, and now they come up to the Red Sea, and there's the chariots behind them. Death behind them and death in front of them. That's what they saw. That's what they saw. And Moses said, "Don't be afraid, just stand still." In other words, get quiet. Get quiet. Deb and I have a game we play every morning. And the game is simply this. Whoever says "I love you" the most wins the day. That's it. So Debbie's always up before me, and a lot of times she'll come in and try to cheat, shake me, and say, "Bah, what?" And I wake up, "I love you the most." And that's so. But I'm very sneaky. No, that's not the word I was going to use. But I can walk really quiet, and so she'll be in her office, and I'm not kidding. It may take me 5 minutes. Most people in our house. It may take me 5 minutes to get from my bedroom door to her office door, but I'm taking my time. The other morning, as a matter of fact, I would wait for her to rustle paper, and I'd take a step. And I'd stand there for a little bit. Then she rustles more. I'd take another step, stand there for a little bit. And I get to the point where I get right in the door, and I'm standing right in the doorway, and I go, "Deb, what? I love you the most." But that's the stillness I'm talking about. You stand somewhere. He's saying, stand still. Don't move. Don't talk. Don't even breathe. Just stand still and watch what God's going to do for you. That's what God was telling Elijah at the entrance of the cave. Stand and see. Listen and see what's going to happen now. He says, stand still and watch what the Lord will rescue you today. When you get to that point in life where things seems like they're just bombarding you, then just stand still. Get calm. Get quiet. And listen to the whisper of God. When we're standing still, whose voice do you hear? Do you hear the voice of the problem? Do you hear the voice? If you're hearing all those things, you're not listening to the right voice. I use the illustration many times. I hate digital radio. I do. I like old-time radio where you go and you hit the note. You get right there. You can pinpoint it. You know, digital radio, it'll pass right over to the next loudest station. And most cars, we rented a van, and I couldn't fine-tune it. Just hit, boom, it goes to the next loudest station. And that's the way we oftentimes hear, is we go to the next loudest station. But God's given us a receiver inside of us that you can fine-tune it just like old-time radio. And you can hear the quietness of His voice over the loudest of everything else if you'll just listen. When we listen, that's when we're hearing. Helen Keller said this: the only thing worse than blindness is having sight with no vision. You know, Mark Batterson says this in his book. I don't remember which book I'm pulling out. He says, perhaps the same could be said of those who are hearing but not listening. We say we hear God, but are we listening to God? Are we hearing Him to say we can hear Him and think, okay, I've got it now, God, and on my way? But are we listening? Because sometimes He gives us it in such a way that we need to stand still, stop what we're doing, listen, and listen, and listen. I traveled to Dallas with Mindy and Kylie for a college visit last year. They kept going, listen, Linda, listen, Linda. I'm going, what? Where do you guys at? So they showed me this video. And there's this little kid debating with his mom. Listen, Linda. Now listen, Linda. He's trying to win the war. He's trying to win the if you want to see something funny, well, the kid needs to be beat afterwards. But you want to see something funny? Watch that video, because you can't help but laugh. And the next thing you know, you're going to be telling your wife, listen, Linda, listen. And but the thing is that we need God saying, listen, Bob. When I get panicked about anything, when I feel like I don't know where to turn, and what's changed my counseling ministry is I started listening. I listen to God and I listen to the people. I'm not there to talk, but when I do talk, I talk. But it's when God says, I'll listen and I'll listen. Sometimes I have to listen for 55 minutes. And God says, okay, you got 5 minutes left. Now go back to this point that they said at 10 minutes into the session. Why? Because I'm listening. I want to hear what God has to say to people, not what Bob Martin has to say. I want to hear what He can do in their lives. Peace comes via listening to a whisper. Our peace. Peace is important to us. We live in a world that is void of peace. Seriously, void of peace. And time again, the word we see, in the word we see, people stop and listen to the voice of God. Time and time again, they would stop, they would listen, and they would be able to go on to the next step. They would hear the voice. They stepped away from the noise of life and listened to the whisper of God. And peace always arrived on the scene. Peace comes because we listen to His voice. Well, how do we listen to His voice, Bob? Well, sometimes He speaks, just like Kim. I get it. I'll go through all the names in the church. And just like she said in Foundations. Jesus was talking a lot at one point. Says, and all of a sudden he just stopped. And God says, will you listen to me? If you'll just stop and listen to me, I'll tell you what we're going to do. So many times when we go to prayer, we want to do all the talking. As Vince said, it's not about us talking. It's about us listening. The most important part of your prayer time is listening to God and hearing what He wants to say to you. I don't know about you, but I want to hear Him talk to me all the time. I want to be walking through Kmart. There is no Kmart. Walmart, wherever. I want to hear the voice of God. I want to fine tune. There's part of my channel that's always tuned in, or I try to keep it tuned in so He can speak to me. It's like, that's the reason why when I'm driving down the road, you ever drive down the road and all of a sudden all these things come to you? I mean, preachers, I guess, probably notorious for it. From I know that I am. I'm going, I need one of those cars that drives itself, so that when the Lord starts talking, I go, okay. I used to be younger. Wasn't skilled at it, but I was more of a daredevil, I guess, because as back when I had the old car phone, was a bag phone, right? And so you pick it up and phone would ring, put it on my ear like this, just like you do at home, right? And I'm driving down the road. I had a 4-speeder too. I have a 4-speed. I'm driving down the road. I got the phone like this, and I got to write that down. So I get a pen and paper. I'm writing it down. My knees on the steering wheel, that type of stuff. My mother-in-law about died of a heart attack one day. I was doing that. I said, "It's okay. I do it all the time." It's like, it's not a smart way to drive. But the thing is that I would like to have one of those, because God speaks to me when I'm driving, and He puts these thoughts in my head, and I want I want them to register, so I have to fine-tune that device, that receiver, to where I remember what he said. I remember. I don't have to write it down because I remember what he's telling me. I want to remember because that whisper is going to guide my day, guide my week, guide maybe my message or whatever. Are we just listening to the noise that surrounds us? The bill that's crying out at us? The debt that we can't overcome, the healing that we're after. I don't know. I guess I'm transparent up in here. I'll just say this. I don't know what I did a while back to my shoulder. All I know is that every once in a while I got to lay hands on myself because I have such a pain in it, and it can be overwhelming. And I woke up this morning, and I said, my shoulder. Look, it's got to stop. When I was driving, I told Deb, I said, my shoulder is aching today again. There's times where when I get ready to get out of bed, because the way I have to get out, I'll pull and it's like, oh, there was my shoulder again. And I have to go, okay, God, you said I'm healed. Your word said I'm healed. You've told me I'm healed. This has to go. It can't stay in my life. It has to go. Well, what happens? It just is still there. It's still there. It's still there. Do I want to listen to the pain? Or do I want to hear the voice of God? Do I want to listen to the bill that's crying out and saying, this is due today and I can't do this or I can't do... No, I got to hear God say, it's okay, Bob. I'm going to take you all the way. That's the voice I want to hear. But it's not screaming at me. What's screaming at me is my shoulder. What's screaming at me is the bill. What's screaming at me is that Rob totaled my car in November. That type of stuff. Those are the things that scream at you. The thing is, I just had to come up with another thing. The thing is what it is we have to start listening to the voice of God. Hearing His whisper. Are we listening to the wind? That's the wind, isn't it? All the commotion, all the stuff, all that's coming at you. Are we listening to the wind? Are we listening to the earthquake? That's when everything seems like it's blowing up around you. Aaron and Bree, a couple years back, earthquake hit. About Christmas time. Boom. They could have panicked. They didn't panic because they listened to the voice of God. They kept doing what they were supposed to be doing. They kept sowing. They kept tithing. They did what they were supposed to do. And that earthquake was there, but it didn't destroy everything. Matter of fact, God came in like a whisper. Just a few weeks later, just a couple of days, I don't remember how the time frame was, but it was like, because the earthquake, they didn't listen to the earthquake. They didn't listen to the wind. Are you gazing at the fire? My world's burning down. Everything around me seems like it's a mess. Everything I touch, you get there, don't you? Why? Because you get the noise is bombarding you so much. That's fear. That's coming against the man and woman of God of faith that you are. Family things. All kinds of things. What we have to do when those things arise is hear the whisper. Remember the whisper. When we first started with Grace Ministries, and the first couple of times that I preached in Kentucky, I would get up there and I would almost be apologetic about things. And I do remember this, that God used my pastor, Pastor Callahan. As I came off the platform, I was the last speaker of the morning session that day. As I came off the platform, he pulled me over. He was sitting in a chair on the aisle. He pulled me and says, "Come here, Bob." He says, "I just want to let you know, you got a place in this ministry. You just got to find it and hear it. You got to hear it and find it." That spoke volumes that day. I still didn't know what to do with it. I still wasn't real comfortable. But what happened is that voice, and because he's my pastor, I believe God used his voice to speak to me. So that even when anytime I get a chance to speak, even here at times, when the apprehension comes up, when I think, I don't know, God, if this is the right message, and I don't know if I've heard you this week, and I'm trusting you, but I don't know if I'm as prepared as I'd like to be. That voice of God says, you have a place. I placed you there. Hear my voice. So in all areas of your walk, all areas of your life, beloved, when the wind comes and the earthquake hits and the fire is just burning your world down, Turn your tuner to the whisper that speaks louder than them. That's what Elijah did. And we find that Elijah then goes forth from that place and becomes that mighty man of God still that needed to be done. So mighty that his apprentice Elisha says, I want double your portion. His apprentice was so enthralled with what God was doing in Elijah's life, that he says, I want...
The wind stopped.
The wind stopped. I want double your portion. And he was given double the portion. Amen? So this week, I want you hearing the whisper. Next week, I want you hearing the whisper. For the rest of your lives, listen to the whisper in the midst of your struggle. In the midst of the earthquake, in the midst of the fire, listen for the whisper of God. And don't blink. I love you guys. Have a great week. If you would like prayer, remember this Saturday, you don't want to miss that, is giving Jeff and Rob a hard time. And Thursday night especially, but Saturday, don't miss Saturday night. It's going to be a powerful time. I know them two young men are going to have a great word for us. And I'm sure Pastor Jack will come up with something. So, on Sunday morning. But I know he's looking forward to being here with us. But come Saturday night, bring somebody with you, and let people see the quality of word that's coming in out of this place with our own people. Amen. And we look forward to seeing you Thursday, Saturday, and then again Sunday. And Pastor Jack will be in Pecan on Sunday night also. God bless you. Have a great week. Thanks for being here today. Stay cool out there also. All right. God bless.